I came across some reports from management meetings at the Countess of Chester Hospital, and this is for the whole hospital, but I was looking at 2015 and 2016 executive management meetings, and I just thought it'd be worth saying a couple of things that were on here. So anyway, 2015, September 2015, there was Alison Kelly, was one of the people at these meetings, and she was reporting that she, the director of nursing, as most people will know, and quality, and she reported it. So in September 2015, she reported a third NEBRA event. Well, that might fit fine because that could have been anywhere in the hospital. So NEBRA events are serious events that happen, very serious events. I think they're the most serious events, the NEBRA events. That would include things like so-called murders and things like that. So there you go. But I don't know what they're related to. But then when you come on to October 2015, there are no NEBRA events. I'm just looking for the page here. Here we are. That's another bit I want to go through. This as well. To receive the trust mortality report. But here, look. To receive an update on NEBRA events and serious untoward incidents, Mrs. Kelly reported that there have been no NEBRA events. And Mrs. Kelly reported there are 4 level 2 investigations currently being undertaken at the trust, and these were being monitored and reviewed at Quality, Safety and Patient Experience Committee. But the level 2 investigations, obviously in the whole hospital, there's no NEBRA events. October 2015, that is. Right, no NEBRA events reported in the whole hospital, okay. So that includes the neonatal unit, obviously, because it's a whole hospital. So that's a bit strange, isn't it? Because we apparently had the murder of child I, and I'm just checking the timeline here. Yeah, that certainly would have been a NEBRA event. And then Brewery was very concerned, wasn't he, apparently, by the 23rd of October 15. But following the death of child I, apparently, he was concerned then. Yeah, so there you go. But there was no NEBRA events reported in the whole hospital, but that would have been a NEBRA event. So it just shows to me that there were, however, well, it shows to you that they weren't that concerned at that time that there'd been murders, because there hadn't been any murders, had there? But then there were 4 were 4 level 2 investigations. We don't know what they're for, but they were probably ongoing ones into various incidents that happened. But for that, I'm looking at that particular point in time, no NEBRA events had been recorded in that month's meeting. The child I was supposedly a persistent, calculated, cold-blooded, blah, blah. Letby was supposed to have inserted air into the baby's stomach, into the girl's stomach, wasn't she? And all this. Now, so that wouldn't have been that kind of death, or a baby dropping dead that for no reason or not understanding event. Because they were saying all these were terrible, these babies shouldn't die because it was unexpected, all this. Anyway, there were 4 2-level investigations in the whole hospital, so we don't know what they were to do. There could have been anything in any unit in the whole hospital, right? Because these are the top management meetings, and they're not splitting down exactly where all these things were going on. They're just giving an overall view. Oh no, it said there was something about mortality there, and it said that they would change. Ian Harvey was saying they were changing to HED benchmarking, health evaluation data benchmarking. Now that is AI, really. I think it's Palantir stuff. It's that digital data board, which is supposed to be federal, and it's linked with Palantir. So if that's the way that they're calculating likelihood of deaths and etc., it shows how they're coming up with all kinds of wrong and ridiculous scenarios. And just to clarify, Palantir is named after the Palantiri stones in Lord of the, the films and the books Lord of the Rings, the Palantiri stones, which were the seeing stones. They won't tell you this, but that's what it's really named after, the seeing stones, which in the Lord of the Rings, they don't actually lie. They deceive by misrepresenting, misrepresenting the light, misrepresenting how you see things, so that you see things in a certain way. This is what Palantir is doing, okay? So in effect, it's just being dishonest. It's gathering all this data from all over the world, and then it's misrepresenting or representing it in a way which suits, the controlling forces, not you and me. So it's deception. Palantir is deception, and that's what we got for an NHS data board. Now, actually, I'll put a link to an article I wrote about that, about data, and the way this is being done at the bottom. I'm still on October 2015 report, board meeting report. Mr. Harvey added that there has been a change from previous years in relation to the number of doctors undergoing fitness to practice reviews with the GMC. There have been 5 doctors entered into fitness to practice reviews during the last 12 months from the Trust. Mr. Harvey stated that there has been a change in the public perception of the GMC, as each referral of a doctor to the GMC is due to a complaint. The way they word these... Yeah, there's been a change in the amount of fitness to practice to doctors. I presume that means an increase. I mean, because otherwise they'd say, oh, there's been a reduction and we're doing really well. So, I mean, yeah. And also, so we can assume that's an increase, fitness to practice. And therefore that's changed the public perception of the GMC. Excuse me? I mean... No, I think it's, I don't think the public have a great perception of the GMC anyway. I think they know they're pretty much a closed shop, but as a union or whatever they are. So, but I think, no, it's about perception of whether doctors are fit to practice. I think people care about, not how they perceive the bloody GMC, although the GMC, of course, are the people that you have to trust to regulate doctors, and of course they ought to deal with these complaints, and but of course we know the GMC are totally controlled by them, so there is a complete waste of time going to the GMC about anything. Anyway, but it's saying it there and then. In October 2015 there were a lot of doctors, 5 doctors to be precise, but more than normal, undergoing fitness to practice and complaints and stuff like that at that trust. That's in the whole trust. We don't know exactly who they were. So I'm going back now to... Now let me just come on to, before I go back, to December 2015, because I couldn't find November for some reason. Now, December 2015, again, there's no never events. Alison Kelly's reporting no never events. But there were 6 level 2 investigations. There'll be, throughout the whole hospital, 6 level 2 investigations. And it says here no never events in August 2015 either. Right, so in August 2015, I'm just trying to see, go back again to remind myself. But of course, we've got the murder of child E and the attempted murder of child F, which both would have been serious never events, presumably, but not according to the hospital meetings at the time, they weren't. The management obviously weren't very concerned, and Alison Kelly weren't concerned about babies dropping dead for no reason, because there was no reason, because they knew at the time, weren't there? There was, they were, there wasn't any concern with the, particularly at the time, was it? It was only when they put them all together later, and it was like, oh, statistically, this looks a bit odd, so. So let me go back a minute. Hang on, what's this say? Check on. So I got, there was a never event reported, but it was a retained tampon and a vaginal delivery, and that was in maternity. I think there were 2 of those incidents. Well, one was in February 2016, but again, that was maternity. But I don't really know what that entails, a retained tampon. If anyone does, can... obviously what was happening in maternity could have had an ongoing effect on the neonatal unit, but I don't think a retained tampon is. I don't know. I don't really know about that anyway. Right, so anyway, September 2015. So I'm going to go back again. We've got, as we know, but this is documented here, and this was in the September report 2015. There was red, very unsafe staffing levels across the neonatal unit. So specifically to the neonatal unit was the worst in the whole hospital. So, and it had been that bad for 6 months up until June 2015, when supposedly there was a slight improvement, but statistically it's still right down the bottom of the league on the neonatal unit, especially for care staff. Now they've laid out specific percentages for June 2015 here on staffing levels. On the neonatal unit, so I was looking at the charts, reduced care staff, there were reduced care staff on the neonatal unit, and there was a lower overall compliance of staff levels. So there was they were at, on the whole staffing level of the neonatal unit, they were only at 91.6% of actual hours compared to what were planned hours. So there was only 91% of the hours that should have been there for all the staff. And then of the care staff on the neonatal unit, of planned hours, there was only 81.6% of those became actual hours. So they were understaffed. We know that already, but it's document the actual percentages here. So they were bottom of the league for the whole hospital. The neonatal unit was doing worse than the whole hospital in terms of staffing. It was the worst unit. And there was also a midwifery staffing shortfall. It says here there's supposed to be the staffing shortfall was 3.38 WT. I can't remember what that means. If anybody else knows what's WT, but there's supposed to be a 1:3 ratio, and apparently the national recommended rate was 1:29. Is that? But anyway, there was a midwifery staffing shortfall as well, which would obviously have an ongoing effect again on babies ending up in the neonatal unit. And also there was that thing about, there was a plan to replace Band 4 nurses who had left with Band 5, but I don't know if that was done or not. And there was also a lot. They were going over. I think it was to Spain, was it Italy or Spain, to get nurses because they had this real shortage, or to get staff. Apparently, so I've gone to October 2015 when they claim no never events. December 2015, no never events. Apparently, and then February 2016. Now, there was a problem here with, it was documented that falls in the hospital were a problem with that. That's more likely to be elderly people, I don't know, but anyway. And then you had this never event, which was in maternity, which is a retained tampon. And back to November 2015, there were 2 level 2 investigations. And then in the report for February 2016 now, right, so here, I'm just going to try and see if I can, let me see that. See that red bit, there's the neonatal unit across there. And that's going from December to June. And a slight improvement, June, July, it's 2015. And then we got all red again from August to the end of the year, 2015. That's the staffing levels in the neonatal unit. Look at that compared to the rest of the hospital, absolutely appalling. Really bad, but doesn't seem to be doing that much about it. Whether they could or not, I don't know. Here again, December 2015. We're coming down to the percentage of staff Right down the bottom of the league is neonatal in terms of percentages of actual hours for staff as opposed to planned hours. That's for the nurses and midwives there, 88.5%, and for the care staff, 86.3, I think that is, and overall 87.8%. This is right down the league. I'm comparing it with other percentages in the hospital, and it seems to be, again, it's right down the bottom. That's for December 2015. So again, okay, the staffing levels at this point, again, really, really bad. Yeah, and there was sepsis was marked red as well. So for the whole hospital, they weren't in line with the national CQIN, whatever that is, but they weren't in line with what they should have been in line with for sepsis. So there was a sepsis problem here, or they weren't dealing with sepsis properly in the whole hospital. So, you know, again, we know that we're pretty sure that babies at that, some of the so-called murders by Lucy were actually sepsis, weren't they? So there was also a junior doctor industrial action plan for late February 2016. I don't know if that happened. There was an industrial action plan, though. So if that did happen, that would have had an ongoing effect, again, on the wards. Mrs. Kelly reported no never events to December 2015 and Jan 2016, and no serious incidents. Well, yeah, I suppose there was no, I don't think there was any Letby ones she was accused of then. I'm double checking. Yeah, it was, so that's really irrelevant. But I just want to come on to the money for a minute. So Mrs. Kelly reported that due to, so in May 2016, now I've come to May 2016 report. These dates I'm giving are all dates of reports. Mrs. Kelly reported that due to significant pressures on the trust, that there had been an increase in a number of falls, so that could be across the hospital. Also an increase in staffing incidents reported due to current pressures and the number of escalation beds. Mrs. Hodkinson reported that the operational pressures were having a significant impact on staff. Now, these operational pressures were involving money as well. So as mandatory training at appraisals were below the internal target. Financial position. So at that point, and we're at the May 2016 report here, the trust as a whole, because remember we're talking about the whole hospital here, remains on plan to deliver a £10.5 million deficit at the year end. They were struggling financially with this deficit. And so what happened with this? The trust was then 4K off plan at the end of the month. So it's 4,000 off its target at the end of the month for that to service that deficit. The trust has reduced the capital program. Now, this I think is interesting. The trust has reduced the capital program from £11 million to £8 million for 2015 to 16. It's reduced the capital program by £3 million for that year, 2015 to 16. That would have had an effect on the hospital as a whole. So we're talking about the funding here. The capital program is the sort of infrastructure and things that longer term things over a year that need to, that will last more than a year, and that involves also medical and diagnostic equipment that they might need. Also technology and stuff like that they may need, building stuff, repairs that they might need that last. So things like taps, for instance, I presume, are involved in capital funding. So there will be things that, were a bit, that definitely would affect, ultimately it's going to affect care, isn't it? And we know that they, for instance, I remember that incident with the pseudomodins in the taps that the plumber had, and the advice was that I think there was 2 taps needed replacing. I think they replaced one, but one of the taps they didn't replace, And the reason was money. They were trying to save money. And that's why they didn't replace the tap. So it was left with this Pseudomonas in the tap. And that was in the vicinity of the neonatal unit, that tap, wasn't it? So, well, maybe actually in the unit, but it was definitely, it would have affected it. So the Trust had a plan to deliver the cost reduction schemes program of 5.5 by year end. Now I'm presuming that's going to be 5.5 thousand. If the Trust is 4K off plan, they're trying to do a cost reduction cap, presumably of 5.5 thousand. That must be. I've just put 500 on camera going. So there was, anyway, they were really struggling financially. Mr. Higgins refers to variable pay and noted that there had been reclassification. And Hodgkinson replied that that was due to current pressures of staffing requirements in the something from the escalation areas, I think. So they were reclassifying pay structures of some sort. So in other words, they were trying to fiddle how they pay people, I presume, or pay them less, variable pay or whatever. So again, it may have put, some staff may have left because of that. This is over the whole hospital again. So they were 4,000 off plan for the end of the month, and this was for the May 2016. That particular year was a problem, right? It just seems like that was the year when they suddenly got loads of a statistical abnormality. Well, what they took as a statistical abnormality with DAPs and collapses in the neonatal unit, and perhaps if you look at it, the neonatal unit was on the red. It was the worst in the whole hospital for staffing. There was lots of other things going on, lots of cuts being made. There was complaints about doctors. Looks like there was a junior doctor strike as well, or industrial action or something going on. There was a lot of things going on at once, wasn't there? And then we had certain people that should have been consultants with their eye on that ward who were busy making television programs. I think it was Embarrassing Bodies, wasn't it, one of them, Sharon? So I think he had his eye on, he's probably, his focuses was elsewhere around that time. I mean, I'm not saying that he can't make television programs and be a consultant, but, he obviously enjoyed his TV doctor stuff quite a lot, didn't he? And that would have taken away from his concentration on the neonatal unit. And the other consultants weren't going in enough. We know that. We know that was Gibbs was... I think it was Gibbs retiring, I can't remember now. But they were just not... It wasn't... The cover wasn't there. They're only turning up once a week, if that, weren't they? It wasn't... Yeah, so anyway, I just there. And before I go, that was so... I just wanted to highlight that. I mean, some of that stuff may already have been brought up, but I just... usually I'm looking at stuff to do specifically with the neonatal unit, but I thought, well, that was about the whole hospital has this ongoing effect on the neonatal unit. And they've got it there in black and white, that it's in the red and it's badly in the red. So why won't they do something about that? And why weren't they saying that when it came to accusing Lucy of these things? Why weren't they going, yeah, but hang on a minute, we've got a really bad situation on the neonatal unit, which has got nothing to do with Lucy Letby at all. But it's like that just got pushed aside. And yeah, before I go, I just want to say that I'm a bit concerned that I can't read... there's some articles now, because they're bringing all this online safety shit or whatever it is, online safety bill, blah blah. I have written about that before. It was ridiculous. I now finding I can't read a lot of the stuff that I used to read, articles that I used to like reading on Substack, right? There's certain people I'm blocked from reading, and I'm like, what? Why can't I read their stuff? And I'm being blocked, and I'm being blocked because I won't give them ID. So I've now got to give ID to read articles I want to read, and I'm not giving ID. I'm not doing it. I'm just not doing it. End of. I don't agree with showing the Show Your Papers Society, and I'm not gonna. So I'm now blocked from reading stuff that I like to read on Substack. Not all of it, but there's stuff, and I'm sure that at some point I'll probably be blocked from reading articles that have been written about Lucy. I mean, I've written an article, lots of articles about Lucy Letby, and to be honest, and that's not the stuff I'm necessarily talking about right now, but I've been blocked from reading stuff that I'm interested in. Okay, and these are people who. There are people who are writing stuff who are awake, or writing stuff which isn't politically correct, or what they want you to hear, and I can't read it. And so much for this Substack being a place where it was supposedly freedom of speech. That's just going to be ruined as well. And I'm presuming now, I'm worrying that probably there are people being blocked from reading my articles unless they give page on. So I don't know, because I don't know who is reading them and who isn't, really, unless they comment. And so I hope they're not, but it's just this this global totalitarian dictatorship that's coming in, and so that'll be another thing that you've got to watch. Is I don't know if it'll affect the Lucy Letby case, as in will that be something that they start to censor in terms of will they start to block people reading that kind of stuff? I don't know. I don't think I've had any problems as yet accessing anybody that I know, but haven't tried lately. For instance, other people who write on Substack about Lucy. I haven't noticed, but I know that it's happening on YouTube as well with some things, so who knows? But anything that challenges the establishment, especially, and there'll be anything that's to do with alternative health information, is a big one. Okay, so yeah. Oh, well, anyway, yeah, I'll leave it there. I don't know if any of that is... well, I think it is relevant. It's definitely relevant that the hospital was struggling. Yeah, and also it's relevant that they weren't registering never events. Because if those deaths really were so terribly odd that they didn't know why these babies had dropped dead, and they just dropped dead, and there was no explanation for why they dropped dead other than murder, because that's what they're saying, isn't it? Totally, they was lovely, beautiful, healthy babies, nothing wrong with them, and just dropped dead. Well, we all know that's not true. No, we know they were very sick babies, but they were saying there was no reason for it. Well, if there was no reason for it and these babies were dropping dead, then it would have been classified as a never event. And although there have been some there documented, I think the first month I pointed out was September 2015, there was 3 never events reported, but we don't know. That's in the whole hospital where that was. Some of those months, which relate to months where supposedly murders occurred, or attempted murders, there were no events, according to their own records, right? So, but again, we all know this was done after the event. This was done much later on. This was all collated and framed into the idea that there was murders, which was all after the event. It was like the post-mortems or whatever tests and stuff like that, all ignored, or all the pathologist stuff ignored, the coroner, everything ignored at the time, and then rewritten later on to invent this story of mass murder. Because otherwise you might have to admit that this hospital was not managing its finances very well. And and as much as we think that the directors and management were on the side of Lucy, yes, to a certain extent, but they also were desperately trying to cover their own backs, as these people all do, in terms of their mismanagement of the funds. And so although they did stick up for Lucy to some extent, in the end they kind of didn't, did they? In the end they just let it happen. They let it happen. I don't think they thought it would necessarily go that far, but they let it happen. And one of the reasons they had to, they went along with the whole thing at one point was because when they took Lucy off the job, they had to then justify the fact that they no longer had her working there, right? And justify her dismissal. And they were advised by their own lawyers, this was the hospital, they were advised by their legal team that to prevent, for instance, Lucy would have had a great case for unfair dismissal, they needed to look like they had an actual valid reason for the dismissal. In other words, that they had to have a reasonable level of suspicion. Not that she had to be guilty of doing anything, but that the management had to have had enough on, like, a reason for having had to take her off. And in order to make it look that way, they would have to some extent go along with the Jairam Brewery 6, wherever they were, consultants sting, and that might then go as far as allowing them to approach the police, really, and just make it look like there was real grounds for suspicion, which is what I'm saying, in order to justify the dismissal, which they had to justify, in order to cover their own backs for not getting, claims by Lucy for unfair dismissal. And so this was advice coming from lawyers, and the hospital management would have just done what their lawyers said was best for them, because they were struggling financially and they couldn't afford to have more claims against them. And also remember, there was the other issue was, of course, there were several negligence claims, and I did an FOI quite a while back, a long time ago now, and on how many negligence claims were going on, and there was a number of negligence claims, and there still are, aren't there? And they will. It would be easier for them to defend a claim. So the mothers, the parents of the babies and their lawyers, at the moment, what they're having to do is go down the route of getting compensation for the fact that the hospital were negligent, and the fact that supposedly, or is it even corporate manslaughter, whatever you want to call it, or gross negligence, that they were allowing this murderer to run around supposedly the hospital. So the lawyers need to argue that the management were, failed in their duties to that extent, that they were so irresponsible but that would be really hard to prove, right? And the lawyers know that. That's so, because the management, as I said, with these lawyers, can make it look like they had reasonable grounds and they did everything they could. They dismissed Lucy Letby, but they could also argue that they had no actual tangible evidence, so that they did everything they should, and they eventually took her off the job. That's one thing they could try and the lawyer. But if it was a choice between that or direct claims for just appalling medical care and babies getting pseudomonas sepsis or whatever else that killed those babies, all sorts of different reasons why they died, wasn't it? To do with maternal complications, things like that. Them taking babies that shouldn't have been on that unit, them not getting them off quickly enough, the transport issues, all these things, that the lawyers had a better chance then being able to. It's very hard to prove negligence in any case whatsoever. It's very, very difficult, because it's got to be proven that the negligent act led absolutely directly to the death or injury, right? But even so, it'd be easy for them to prove that kind of negligence, them to prove a case where they're saying the hospital were negligent because they let a murderer run around. Because what the hospital can then argue to get out of that as a defence is that Lucy would have broken the employer-employee relationship agreement, or whatever you call it, to such a degree, that level of responsibility or trust between employer and employee, she would have broken that to such a degree that they cannot be held responsible. In other words, she's gone beyond the point of what they can be responsible for, because she's broken that relationship, employer thingy blonde, in a way that they couldn't control. So that would be a great defence for them. And this will all have been explained to them by lawyers, right? So they're better off taking that so if they've got a choice here at the hospital, do we face claims of negligence for allowing sepsis, for allowing babies to die because our doctors are just terrible, whatever, you know what I mean? Do we try and defend that, or do we try and defend the accusation that we've let a murderer run around? They know, and they will have been advised, that easier for them to defend the thing about the murderer running around, right? So that would explain why they backed down in the end and stopped sticking up for Lucy and let it sort of go to the point where she was arrested, because ultimately it would have been easier for them financially to defend that position. It sounds bloody awful, but we all know that, and I'm not saying that's the only reason. There will have been many, many reasons involved of why the management didn't really do something to stop this in the end. They just let it go, didn't they? Or just really try and stick up for Lucy. You know, they just kind of let it go. And I think it will come down to, a lot of it will come down to the financial position. Because I think they knew that she hadn't killed these babies. And they knew that Jerome and Brewery and the other doctors and Gibbs were wrong. They knew that, okay, but they just let it go on. So it's got to be partly, quite a lot of it, down to money. And the reason it carried on, and I say that, and don't forget, once it got to court, the fact that Lucy only had a legal aid lawyer, and that is a massive one as well. Okay, it's a massive one, because I can tell you 100% she wouldn't be in prison right now if she'd had an expensive lawyer. Not in a million years. So again, there's no justice system in this country when your defense depends on how much money you've got. All right, it's another thing. But yeah, so anyway, I'll leave it there. That's all I've got to say at the minute. Night for now. Bye.